Day to welcome everyone to Sterling's 2026 Summer Learning Series. My name is Laura McNeil, and I have the absolute pleasure of hosting this 6-week series. Starting today and running every Wednesday at noon through August 26th, our objective is to deep dive into practical, everyday leadership competencies that produce role model outcomes. Each week, our presenters will provide a 15 to 20-minute deep dive on leadership competencies, followed by a 10-minute question and answer session. Our deep dives will cover integrity and character with Dr. Jason Lysandrini, a fellow of the American College of Healthcare, on July 29th. Influence and communication with Nicole Solomon, Sterling Master Examiner and founding president of Solomon Leadership Solutions, on August 5th. Change management and adaptability with Allah El Hawagi, chairman, Sterling International, on August 12th, and accountability and crucial conversations with Monique Akanbi, Society of Human Resources Management, SHRM director and a host of the Honest HR podcast, on August 19th. And then finally, all of our speakers will come together and help us wrap up on August 26th in a roundtable discussion focused on what's next. These sessions are all broken into 4 parts. First, we will start with a welcome and a recap of the previous session. We'll cover the new material presented by one of our speakers. I'll provide a summary recap of the new material that we did cover, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A session. Questions can be sourced through the chat window in the Zoom. For those questions we run out of time and cannot cover, we will provide responses along with the video recording of the material covered after the call concludes. You can visit the sterlingcouncil.org, the sterlingcouncil.org webpage in the Summer Learning Series section to access these materials. This first session kicks off with an overview of the 4 essential leadership competencies. These will be covered by Roland Martinez. He is the board chair for Sterling, as well as a deputy director with the Florida Department of Health. Roland, one of my very close friends, I'd love to turn it over to you to cover off on the overview.
Hey, Laura, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Wonderful day today. I'm super excited to kick off this summer learning series.
Yeah, it is. It's I'm looking at the participants, and it's a major production here with regards to the number of people who are attending. We're at like 216 people on the call, and growing here. It's amazing that so many folks are finding that competencies or leadership competencies are something that they want to hear more about and kind of practice and get some guidance on it. I think it's great that we're there.
Yes, it's fantastic.
So with that, I think we're gonna kind of jump right into it. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go at it. So here we are. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about give you a kind of a 40,000-foot overview of what is going to be being presented over the next 6 weeks, including today. And talking about these 4 competencies that we're going to be talking about over the next 4 weeks. I know that's kind of confusing, but what we're doing with regards to those deep dives into each one of those competencies. So 40,000-foot level today, and then you can really key in on what it is that resonates with you to be able to do that. So I'm going to be, like I said, providing those high level practical applications and how these kind of work together. And then what I'm hoping to do is foster some reflection in the participants today, right? Where is this resonating with you? Where do you think you need work? What do I need to know more about with regards to these 4 competencies that we're dealing with? And then we'll have some opportunities in the end to be able to provide some questions and answers associated with this. Now, the first most important question that I have to ask, I said, and for everybody in the group, just for the self-reflection piece of this, is really, how do you lead your organization? It's one of the first questions that we ask in the Sterling criteria. It's actually in category 1. And it asks, how do you lead your organization? Extraordinarily simple question. with an extraordinarily complex answer for everybody that's here. So I want you to be thinking about that as we go through these competencies today. Now, along with that, there's some questions that I want everybody to be focused on here, which are these questions. I'm not going to go through all of them, okay? But what kind of a leader do you want to be inside of your organization? How does that relate to the people that you lead? What kind of organization do you want? And what kind of organization do they want? And how do those two states feed into each other, right? And so at the end, what you get left with is, how do I contribute to that experience, the experience of the workplace and the experience that people are having with regards to your organization. And so let's begin with integrity and character, our first of our four competencies that we'll be going through. If you want to test a man's character, a great quote, if you want to test a man's character, give him power, and it'll tell you exactly who they are. And so when we're thinking about integrity and character inside of organizations, we really need to think about it at its most foundational level, the psychological contract in the workplace. Not just what the workplace expects of the staff and the employees that work there, but also what the employees expect of the organization. This is an extraordinarily fragile relationship. And we all know this. We've all had experiences with regards to the organizations that we lead, and how quickly this can get misaligned. And there's really two components to this, right? When we really think about the behaviors that get exhibited in an organization, there's really two components at its most foundational level with regards to the creation of the psychological contract, and they work like this. It's really whether it's the ethics of care or the ethics of justice that we deal with. Now, the ethics of justice pretty much is defined as you see on the screen. It's the application of universal principles that we apply to everybody. We apply the rule equally to everybody that we see, and we really think about that from a standpoint that is equitable for all, right? And that's how we think about it. But really, honestly, when you think about the differences in performance in the organization and how rules are applied, is it the best way to do that? I mean, some of the rules are set out that you want to make sure that everybody follows, but some situations need more care. I've always said that if you take your top performers and you treat them the same way that you treat your bottom performers, you're going to have a bit of a problem, because you're not going to have top performers for long. And so really what you start getting into is the ethics of care, right? When we're dealing with integrity and character in an organization. And, do you keep your promises? And so the ethics of care is really about the application of relational context specific principles. They really deal with the individual as a whole, what that person needs at that moment in time. And that really makes the connection. When this breaks in an organization, when you get a disconnect between that psychological contract with regards to the ethics of care, more often than not, it's because of that, because we're not treating individuals as individuals. And that really becomes what it is. And the framework here is really what's right, what works, and what matters. Okay. The next competency that we're going to be talking about over the next 4 weeks is the influence and communication. Now, influence and communication is leadership's bread and butter, right? The single problem with communication, though, is that everybody thinks it's happened. And so how do we go about communicating in a way that people can understand? Now, all of us remember at some point in time when we were in college, you got the communications process with the encoder, the transmission, the decoder, and a feedback loop. But what's the best way to do that? And how do we make that happen? And so influence is key with regards to leadership. Influence, how do we get people to do what we want them to do? And if we do it at the height of the art form, how do we get them to do that because they want to do it? Not because we want them to do it, but because they've been inspired to do so. And so the words that we choose are critically important in how we go about communicating what it is that we want to do, and how do we ignite their imaginations to be able to make things happen. Now, with influence, there are 19 individual tactics that you can engage in. And I've talked with Laura about this before in our conversations that we have on a regular basis. Most people can name 2 of these. They don't really understand that there's 19 that you can engage in the literature. And so using the appropriate influence tactic at the appropriate time to be able to get your message across in the appropriate way so that people will act is critically important. And so you can't be like a one-trick pony and use one of these all the time. It just doesn't really work. And so influence, which is, as I said, leadership's bread and butter, how do you get people to do that? It's really important to understand that competency and really pull it through with regards to how you are speaking to the organization, how you're communicating to the organization, and how you're getting things done. Now, influence here, there's a lot of stuff on the screen, but influence here is not a one-shot event, okay? It takes time, it takes process, it takes repetition to be able to make things happen. You really have to understand people. You really got to use words effectively. The words you choose, the inflection in your voice are critically important with regards to this. And you've got to be able to manage conflict because things come up all the time, right? Teams are extraordinarily difficult. When the interpersonal relationships inside of the organization are the most difficult issues that you have. And how do you navigate those? And how do you make that happen? And how do you manage that conflict and get through the stages of team so you can get through to performing is really a super big challenge. You do that through influence. You do that by being the person that you need to be when you need to be it and saying the thing that you need to say at the right moment. Our next competency, right, is change management and adaptability, right? It's not the change that does you in, it is the transition. Change happens all around us all the time. And so it's an essential part of the world. It's always happening. There's positive change, there's negative change. All of us are experiencing change at any given moment. Folks are going to get paid on Friday. There's going to be a change in their bank account. We perceive that as a positive effect. Then when we pay the bills, well, that's a negative effect. There's always positive and negative with regards to this. There's no normal with regards to how people deal with change. Okay, everybody deals with change differently, and it's how do you adapt to that new change? Now, change, when we look at the change cycle, right? When we look at it as a competency, and we look at the change cycle, it really involves the loss of something and the beginning of something else. All change is like that, and it's the undiscovered country that makes us really scared. It's about the unknown that's coming at us that we're not sure of, that we're comfortable in where we've been in the past and what we've gotten used to. That causes the real issue. It's the uncertainty. And so the danger zone here is when you go from the discomfort to the discovery in this particular model, and you go through that. That's the make or break point. How am I dealing with the change? And you're either going to be successful or you're not. So many people have that trouble with regards to that. Now, one of the things that you'll notice with regards to the change cycle is that it really mimics the stages of grieving, right? Because of the loss piece. And that's important to understand that whenever an organization goes through change, whenever you're engaging in change, because all leaders are change agents, whenever you're engaging in change, you have to understand that there's going to be a loss to the organization. Of course, there's some early adopters that always, are excited about the change and they're engaged and they want to be along with it. But there's a whole group of people that are uncertain about what's going to happen, and you've got to really guide them through all of these stages, specifically and focus specifically with regards to the transition phase. That's really from where we are, from where we were to where we're going to be. And so how do you do that as a leader? I think you're starting to get that some of these competencies are interrelated and you really got to use them. I'll talk about that a little bit later with regards to that. And so the next competency that we've got is accountability and crucial conversations, right? A little bit different. You can see the influence. You can see the influence competency and the communications competency kind of creeping in here again with regards to this. But accountability and crucial conversations, right? It's not about not just saying the right thing, but leaving the thing unsaid that's at the tempting moment. That's really what's got to be done, because we all have the voice in our head that wants to say something at the wrong time. And then we always wonder why it happened the way that it happened without really understanding that we've contributed to this thing in such a way that has caused the issue itself. So quick question for everybody. I'm not going to expect everybody to answer. You can probably share it in the chat if you'd like. But what's your least favorite task as a supervisor? When you ask supervisors, when I ask this across my organization, the answers are pretty common with regards to what their task is and what the commonality is with regards to those least favorite tasks. And typically it's about this. It's about this accountability and crucial conversation kind of piece. You'll see what it works out to be. So when we look at those answers, whoop, these are the top 5 answers that we get. Then I'm sure some of you are looking and go, oh yeah, I don't like to do that. And I definitely don't like to do that. And so, performance evaluations, disciplinary conversations, providing an unpopular direction, delivering bad news, conducting job interviews. Those typically happen to be the top 5 answers. What they have in common is is that most of these, they have in common is the conflict piece, right? You're conducting a job interview, is a little bit less controversial with regards to whether or not it's a conflict, but it's not a dialogue for the most part. It's disguised as a polite conversation, but it's not really. But performance evaluations, we can see in all these other ones that there's a conflict that can come up because of it, and people at their most basic avoid conflict. Nobody likes to hurt anybody's feelings. So I know a performance evaluation, I got to give somebody feedback about their poor performance. Oh boy, I don't want to do that. It's easy when you're scoring them a 5 on their evaluation, but when you've got to give them the 1 that they're not doing well, or you've got to give them the feedback about what their performance is, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Disciplinary actions, that speaks for itself. Unpopular direction. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take this action. People don't want to go there because there's going to be a change. There's that pushback, that conflict is what causes this. What I'll say to you is that it's probably the mindset. If you're not liking those conversations and what you're going into, it's probably the mindset. When I talk to my supervisors and my leaders in my organization, the question I always ask them is, what is it that you're thinking about when you go into this conversation? If you're thinking about that you're going to hurt somebody's feelings, the likelihood of you wanting to have the conversation is very low, versus going into the conversation looking at it from a point of view of, maybe I'm providing this person information that they need to become a better them. And so in that particular case, you feel more like a helpful tool than an unhelpful one or a conflicting one. And it's easier to have that conversation over time. So how do you practice that with regards to the conversations that you're having? Crucial conversations is really about where 2 people are going to have conversation where the stakes are high, the opinions vary, and the emotions run high. You know that you're going to be engaged in a crucial conversation, whether that's in your personal life or whether that's your professional life. These conversations do come up. There are really 4 types of conversations that go on, both personal and private. Professional and private. I'm sorry. And they work like this. There are cooperative conversations, there are competitive conversations, or one-way and two-way conversations. That sets up for these four quadrants about, whether they're discourses, dialogues, diatribes, or debates. And so are you identifying the appropriate conversation type at the time that you're having it in the crucial conversation to be able to deal with it? There are times when you've just got to be able to, it's not a dialogue. It's not a debate. You're just telling people this is what you need to do, and you're providing the information that they need. It's not a back and forth where sometimes it is a dialogue. Sometimes it is that you're not the smartest person in the room, and you need to engage in the dialogue that you need to engage in to be able to do the things that you need to do. And provide the information and get the information that you need. So the dialogues are more appropriate. So understanding, where you are from a cooperative or competitive standpoint, a one-way or a two-way conversation really sets up for the types of conversations that you need to really, really be having. We're looking at all these 4 competencies. Competencies are like muscles in your arm when you pick something up. They work together. Right? You don't just use one muscle group, you don't just use one muscle, you use multiple muscles to be able to do what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so you can see from these 4 competencies, they're really interrelated in how they work together, and you bring them in and out of each other. Some take, more of a focus, depending on what the impetus for the conversation is, for the impetus for the action is, but you bring in the other competencies to be able to support them in some meaningful way. what I'm here to tell you now is what your next steps are, right? And I'm coming to the end of it, and what your next step are. Okay, so leadership is a continuous journey, right? You really got to look at these competencies that we're going to be looking at over the next 4 weeks, and see what resonates. And what you've heard me say today, see what resonates with you, what you have energy around, what you actually think you need work on, right? The things that we do well, and we have evidence for what we do well. We obviously, you continue to practice those, but how can you leverage those to be able to bring along some of the other competencies that are necessary for leadership? How do you practice them? How do you make them part of your repertoire, and how do you do that? And that's, really kind of, you got to really go back, take stock of that, and create a development plan. So really listen over the next 4 weeks about what the details are with each one of these competencies. Learn more about them. There'll be resources that'll be provided that you can look at with regards to that. And then what's left is that you got to practice, right? That's how you get to Carnegie Hall, right? You got to, in order to get to Carnegie Hall, you got to practice. And so what is it that I need to do? How do I do it on a regular basis? And practice those skills, because competency is about frequency. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And then how do you really, and it's not on the slide, but how do you give somebody permission to tell you that you're doing it well or not well, that can check you when you're exhibiting those behaviors that you shouldn't exhibit? Now, I'm going to leave you with these last ones for food for thought. I'm not going through all of these. I'm going to leave them on the screen. But you think about what it is that you want to do with these competencies, and where you are as a leader, and what you want to be, what kind of leader you want to be in your organization, and what you want to push forward with regards to that. So with that, Laura, I'm all through with the high level competency, which is a miracle that I can get through 22 slides in the time frame that I did, for those of you who know me. And so,
and that is absolutely true, Roland. You did an amazing job. This was a lot of good material, and I'm sorry I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. You didn't cut me off. I kind of shut up, and that was the deal. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can come back to it. So
actually, if you don't mind, would you mind resharing and just stay on that screen? Not just because there's an ice cream cone there and it's lunchtime, but also because I really love the one bullet, third from the bottom. It just struck me. I scanned through these, but I resonated on this one. Words from our height, the height of a leader, hurt when they fall. Yeah. And I think that empathy coming from a leader is really kind of the magic sauce within the competencies that you were kind enough to give us an overview of.
Yeah. That's critically important. That's a big piece of the puzzle. I was just talking to someone today, and I said to them, if the actions that you're taking with regards to the group are not working in the direction that you're working, you need to really think about how you're contributing to that. How you're contributing to that interaction. And if you're not contributing that interaction appropriately, what are the things that you can do differently with regards to that? It can't be that you walk into a group and say, everybody's lost but me. You gotta really take stock of, if I'm chopping wood and there aren't any chips flying, I need to use a different axe.
That's right.
And so, I usually need a different skill set to be able to make that happen.
And you can't be a leader without followers, right? Mm-hmm. Willing followers, a true leader.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. That's that old saying that
trust.
That old saying that says that, a leader without followers is just somebody taking a walk. And it's absolutely true.
Absolutely. Well, phenomenal job. Thank you very much for this. I love this food for thought. I love ice cream. What a way to end this thing. But let me read back to you while you were talking. I was taking some notes. So I did promise the audience, the attendees, our listeners, that I would provide a recap. And we'll start next session with this recap again. So you'll hear this again, unless Roland modifies anything. So there were 4 leadership competencies, Roland, that you covered: integrity and character, influence and communication, change management and adaptability, accountability, and crucial conversations. Mm-hmm. These competencies work together to establish an organizational culture through leadership's role modeling. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Ethics of justice versus ethics of care. There's a difference. They're not the same, which you highlighted. Ethics of justice is a universal code. It's objective principles that would apply to all, where ethics of care is more positioned towards an individual and more designed to be aligned or applied based upon relational principles that are indicative of that individual's preferences or needs. We got that right, right?
Yes.
Okay. Influence requires a relational connection and often requires give and take, creativity, and flexibility. And influence, like we were talking earlier, is the magic sauce for leadership. You can only influence. And through that influence, if it comes across well, you'll garner more followership, right? And stronger leadership patterns will evolve. 4 types of conversations you covered were cooperative, one-way, two-way, and competitive. You have differences outlined, and I have them in my notes, but those were the 4 ways that we can host conversations. Obviously, two-way is highly encouraged. One-way is needed when appropriate, but if it's every day, all day long, it gets a little tiring. And it does not garner support, I think I heard you say.
Yes.
Organizational change, I love this one, is a constant and it's a necessity. I love that little nugget you threw out there. It's essential and yet it affects everyone differently because you called out a couple of emotive traits: fear, discomfort, discovery. There's different ways people adapt to change or embrace change. And as a leader, understanding those influences on our followership is really important because not everyone is going to receive it in the same manner. Therefore, organizational change is essential. It's a constant, and yet because it affects everyone differently, one of the ways that leaders can help others that are struggling perhaps with the fear aspect or the discomfort aspect is to present it in a way where it poses as an opportunity for self-motivation and innovation, presenting the change in a positive light because most change is positive. Attitude plays a deep part in understanding adaptability. Then you brought up a slide around least favorite supervisor tasks, and there was a long list there. I think we had a little bit of banter and chat around delivering bad news, conducting job interviews, disciplinary actions, those sorts of things. And then characteristics essential to effective leadership include gaining and sustaining trust, because once damaged, trust is not easily restored. I love that.
Yes.
Acting with integrity, connecting and building relational linkages, communicating effectively to optimize influence, adaptability, and change. And then I closed with 3 key things. Leadership should not be viewed as a power. It should be viewed as a responsibility. Leaders are accountable for the outcomes of the entire organization, including the performance of all the individuals within that organization. If there is no leadership approach or system or a leadership system is not role modeled, in effect, the leader is doing nothing, then that also creates a culture. And that culture will evolve without any kind of leadership influence. Did I get all of that right?
Yeah, that's all of that is absolutely correct. Culture, the organization will create a culture all by its lonesome, without any leadership, without any leadership intervention. It requires the reinforcement of that on a daily basis. The synonym for culture is expectation, right? What are the expectations of the organization? What's expected? And without leaders clearly communicating that on a regular basis, the organization will create its own. The natural state of every organization is chaos and inefficiency. It's leaders that bring that focus to the organization through communication, through how they influence, through the engagement of crucial conversations, through all 4 of these competencies. How do you do that in an organization to be able to make that happen? One thing I want to add with regards to change is that sometimes it really helps remind people and bring them back to a place where they navigated the change well in similar situations. And so really to remind them that, hey, look, you went through this before and how did you get through and what is it that you did? And it helps people understand that the change is constant, and change happens all the time. And we've survived all the change that we've been through. And it helps them put that more in perspective.
Great. Thank you for that. So we have 1 minute left. I've got a question for you.
Sure.
What is the one thing that you can tell our listeners, the audience today, that they should consider doing differently or perhaps do differently or think differently this afternoon or tomorrow morning coming out of this session? What is the one thing they should be thinking differently about or doing differently?
I think that the answer to that is deceptively simple, but it's extraordinarily difficult, and it's because of the way that we're wired. I think the single most important thing you can do as a leader, if you wanted to begin today, is in every situation that you're faced with, whether good or bad, positive or negative, successful or unsuccessful, the question what you need to do is engage in this singular question: how did I contribute to this? How did I do that through my action or my inaction? How did I do that through my words or my silence? How did I make that happen? What was my role in this? And instead of thinking that things are just happening in the environment, you're the leader. And so really asking that question is a really fundamental component to become a great leader, to really be able to shift from a power stance to a service stance. How do I contribute to the organization? How do I contribute to this conversation? How do I contribute to this action plan? How do I contribute to this outcome? How do I contribute to this failure? It was John F. Kennedy that said that success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. And as leaders, you really don't learn from your successes. The successes don't teach us anything. What they do is they lull us into a false sense of security that we can't fail. The truth is that all of our lessons come from failure. And so, how did I contribute to that failure? How did I contribute to that being better? How did I contribute? I think if you ask yourself that question as a leader and you make it the first question in your repertoire, I think you start looking at the situations a bit differently.